So hello, today we're in the Southern Downs, southern Queensland, and I'm up here to do a couple of things, and I have a need to drive through some of the countryside, so I thought I would show you a little bit of this countryside because it's actually looking really nice at the moment. They've had a bit of rain previously with Cyclone Alfred, and just in the last couple of days a bit more rain has come through with the big rain system that's been floating around Queensland, and the place is looking really green and really nice. So we're driving along, we've just left Greenmount, we're heading towards the town of Nobby, and then after that is the town of Clifton. It's quite a historical area, this area. The town of Nobby is where steel rudd came from, so you may well be aware Steel Rudd wrote the Dad and Dave serial back in the early 1900s, and it was all about life on the settlers' blocks. So they were given a certain number of acres, I forget, it was like 64 acres or 128 acres or something, and they had to clear it and get a crop off it within a certain number of years, and then they would receive that as a relatively inexpensive price. It wasn't very expensive to get it, but they had to make the land productive. That was a big part of it. So a lot of them took up land. The early ones got the best land, of course, and the later ones had to make do with some pretty rough and ready blocks that were quite difficult to make productive. Some of them were bony soils up on the hills or areas where they didn't get good rainfall or whatever, and so a lot of them really struggled. And the whole concept of those settlers is that they had a real struggle on their hands. We look around this area right now and it's lush, it looks productive. You wouldn't imagine, during a drought time, some of this area is really quite difficult to make productive. And they didn't have all the modern techniques and the modern breeding and genetics that we have now. Those early crops back in those days were still pretty rough and ready, and a lot of things were still very much designed for European climates. So they were bringing European crops out to grow, which didn't grow well here until they had modified them through breeding to be suited to this landscape and to this type of farming. But it is beautiful farming country around here. There's some rich red soil, some rich black soil, and certainly it's a bit of a patchwork quilt at different times of the year with different crops that will be growing in the area. Farming's still the main game here, but we're relatively close to a main town of Toowoomba, and Toowoomba has all the industry and all the services and so on. But out here is still very much a rural lifestyle. Small towns, small communities, and that's a lifestyle that's very favourable to many people. So a lot of people from the city actually look to buy blocks of land out here and build houses and so on, and then commute into the city daily. So this is the town of Nobby. This is where Steel Rudd was from. The next town along is called Clifton. If I remember rightly, the Clifton was the original site of the Kings Creek Station, which was one of the first stations settled in this area back in the 1830s. So the very first people to settle all of these type of areas were squatters. They came up to the area, they pushed ahead of wherever the government boundaries were. Back in those days, it was all still New South Wales. There was no Queensland in existence yet. And so they largely came up through the New England area, which had been settled also through the 1930s, and these guys just kept pushing up looking for unsettled land that wasn't already claimed, and then they would take it up and it just kept on pushing up. There was no good route through to the coast from up this way in those days, so the main access was actually through the New England and down through the Hunter Valley and on to Sydney, and that was where basically people came up to this area from, and that's where anything that was going back to be sold had to go in the beginning. Then eventually they found some good gaps and put some good roads through the Great Dividing Range and to the port at Moreton Bay or Brisbane. But you can imagine being in this area back in those days, it wouldn't have all been cleared yet. They would have still been clearing, but imagine all of these plains would largely have been forested. Now they're all completely cleared except for a few spots on top of the hills where fortunately they didn't clear them, otherwise those hills would have all washed away. But very few trees nowadays except for a few along the side of the road. But you can imagine this area would have been a light woodland, open woodland back in the day, and it would have been quite a rich area, plenty of timber to be got to build your houses, to build your fences, build everything, make your farm. And they had to build everything. They would have a blacksmith locally who would build them tools or repair tools. Then they would have to build everything out of that. Some of them would do their own blacksmithing, particularly the early pioneers who came to areas with nobody. They had to do everything for themselves. They made everything. They had to grow all their own food. And if they couldn't do that, then they didn't hang around because they couldn't get anything much to eat. They ate a lot of wildlife back in those days. And you can read stories about people shooting and eating koala bears and all sorts of things, but things that would horrify us now. But back in those days is what they had to do to survive. Many of those early settlers, particularly the selectors, not the squatters so much, but the selectors, a lot of them became indebted to their local store. So the store would run credit for them, and basically the store was their local everything type of place. It's where they got food, it's where they got hardware, ammunition, everything, you name it. It came from that one store, and they would hook it all up on credit because they didn't have any money. And then this is Kings Creek here we've just driven through. This little creek here, but Kings Creek station was based here. That was one of the very first stations in the area. So you'd book everything up on credit at the local store, and the store was also like your stocking station agent. If you wanted to sell your crop, you'd go and see them, and they would buy your crop and then on-sell it and so on, and they would keep the proceeds against the money that you've already booked up. So a lot of the time these guys would have lived from year to year in debt constantly with no money and just making do, barely getting by. So we've gone from that point in time where people were living really hand to mouth, just surviving in the bush, and some of them probably didn't survive, through to the modern life that we have now and the modern farming techniques where, you know, instead of one family all pitching in together and working a small block, now you've got big thousands of acres in farms operated by one person or one small family operating, big machines that can cover lots of area, and it's such a different world. And that's also killed off a lot of these small towns and small communities, whereas once there were a lot of people and all of those people had employment, and they all went to school, they all utilised local businesses and services and were real communities. A lot of those places, it's just a name on a map now. You drive through it, you would never know there was a town there. You would never know about all the hopes and the dreams of those people who lived there, and all the things that they did to try and build a genuine community and to make their lives better. So this is Clifton now. This is again, it's just a small town, but it would have everything you'd need if you lived locally. You could come here and do your shopping. There's hardware, there's supermarket, there's all of that stuff, and then you can go and do a bigger shop in a bigger town, which is only like 30-40 minutes away. So It's an interesting drive through a historical area. There's no national parks near here, not very close. Sort of within an hour's drive there are some, and we might go for a walk in those one day, but I don't have time today. But I thought I would share with you just this little bit of history, this interesting little town, these couple of towns together. There's more towns, there's more history to discuss, more things to look at, but that'll be for another video in another day. Anyway, thanks very much for watching the video, and I hope that it was enjoyable for you, and we'll catch you next time. See you later, bye bye.